Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Chapter 18, Text 65. Very well-known verse. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mang namaskuru mame vaishasi satyante pratijane priyosime. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend. Purport: the most confidential part of knowledge is that one should become a pure devotee of Krishna and always think of him and act for him. One should not become an official meditator. Life should be so molded that one will always have the chance to think of Krishna. One should always act in such a way that all his daily activities are in connection with Krishna. He should arrange his life in such a way that throughout the 24 hours he cannot but think of Krishna. And the Lord's promise is that anyone who is in such pure Krishna consciousness will certainly return to the abode of Krishna, where he will be engaged in the association of Krishna face to face. This most confidential part of knowledge is spoken to Arjuna because he is the dear friend of Krishna. Everyone who follows the path of Arjuna can become a dear friend to Krishna and obtain the same perfection as Arjuna. These words stress that one should concentrate his mind upon Krishna, the very form with two hands carrying a flute, the bluish boy with a beautiful face and peacock feathers in his hair. There are descriptions of Krishna found in the Brahma Samhita and other literatures. One should fix his mind on this original form of Godhead, Krishna. One should not even divert his attention to other forms of the Lord. The Lord has multi-forms as Vishnu, Narayana, Rama, Varaha, etc. But a devotee should concentrate his mind on the form that was present before Arjuna. Concentration of the mind on the form of Krishna constitutes the most confidential part of knowledge, and this is disclosed to Arjuna because Arjuna is the most dear friend of Krishna's. This instruction to always think of Krishna and become his devotee is the best instruction for everyone in all places and all circumstances. However, not many people know of it or accept it. Anyone who has accepted it is a great person indeed. Bahunam janmanamante jnanavam mam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabhaha. Generally, only after many, many births of cultivating spiritual knowledge does a person come to the platform of accepting that Vasudeva, Krishna, is all in all and surrender to him. Such a great soul is very rare. Now in this most miserable Kali Yuga, in which it is not expected that, it would not normally be expected that anyone would take to serious spiritual life, by the grace of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as received through the Parampara and especially through Srila Prabhupada, many, many people all over the world, despite their disparate and in most cases sinful backgrounds, are taking to Krishna consciousness. So we take to Krishna consciousness with the idea that we want to be pure devotees of Krishna. It is hoped that people take to Krishna consciousness with that motive. It may be that people take to Krishna consciousness with other motives also, mixed motives. But really the benefit of taking to Krishna consciousness is if one is very serious about being a pure devotee of Krishna. But even though we realize or we accept that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we are His eternal servants, we've come that far, it's a huge step, it's way, way, way above that of karmis, gyanis and yogis, what to speak of the vikarmis, who are the majority population of the modern age. Vikarmi means a sinful person. Despite having come to this position of accepting that the goal of our life is Krishna, this instruction of Krishna that we've just read now, to always think of Krishna, seems to be elusive. How can we actually think of Krishna all the time? It doesn't seem to be very possible to us. But it is possible. It simply requires some practice. And that practice is the process of sadhana bhakti. The acharyas, and especially in our sampradaya, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, knowing our inability or seeming inability to immediately just think of Krishna all the time, they have given us the process of sadhana bhakti, by which one can gradually become purified and one's natural attraction for Krishna can be revived. Then one can always think of Krishna, become His devotee, worship Him, bow down to Him, and go back to Godhead very easily. Sadhana bhakti, there are some basic points of practicing sadhana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti simply means that we want to develop full bhakti to the extent of always thinking of Krishna. Therefore, we adopt certain regulative practices to help us always think of Krishna. So there are a few basic points, a few certain points, that if we simply adopt them in our lives, that will help us to think of Krishna. Probably in the beginning we won't think of Krishna all the time, but by the practice of performing devotional service, it should be that we advance in thinking about Krishna. Of course, Krishna and His name are not different. Krishna and His pastimes are not different. Krishna and His teachings are not different. They're all absolute. Krishna Nam, Krishna Gun, Krishna Lila Brinda. They're all of the same quality. They're all non-different from Krishna. But Krishna's movement is also non-different from Krishna. Prabhupada also mentioned that. So if we're thinking how to spread the Krishna consciousness movement, how to preach Krishna consciousness, then that is also in one sense thinking of Krishna. In one purport here in the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada states that generally people in the beginning, they become attached, or in a good way, in a positive spiritual manner, they become attached to, or they take pleasure in performing devotional service. And then when they're more mature, they take pleasure in Krishna Himself, directly. As we see in Chaitanya Charitamrita especially, how devotees, they relish beholding the form of the Lord, smelling the form of the Lord, tasting Him in the form of his prasada, which is also not different from him, by hearing songs about Krishna or hearing the sound of his flute directly vibrated by him. Devotees, they relish the beauty and sweetness of Krishna directly. So that is the goal of all devotees who are seriously practicing Krishna consciousness, to be fully absorbed in thought of Krishna. So the question should be, well, how do we get from here to there? We're following the path of sadhana, bhakti, but it may appear to be somewhat slow. And often devotees come and say, well, you see, I still have this problem. It's quite common. People say, well, I'm becoming too angry, or I'm still attracted by lower desires, and so on. But if one sincerely tries to serve Krishna, then in due course of time, Krishna will reveal himself to that devotee. However, there are some certain basic points which, if we understand and apply them in our lives to the best extent that we can, will help us tremendously to advance in Krishna consciousness. To advance in Krishna consciousness means to be more and more conscious of Krishna and less attracted to the material world. In some ways, as we advance in Krishna consciousness, we could become more conscious of the material world. In fact, Krishna consciousness, it's not that we simply withdraw our consciousness from the material world and only think of the spiritual world, but one becomes more aware, more alert. So even materially, a devotee may be more conscious, but in a different way. In other words, a devotee, because his intelligence is awakened, even his material consciousness is superior to that of many non-devotees. But he sees it in a different way. He sees matter in a different way to that which a materialist sees it. A materialist sees matter as something to be exploited and enjoyed, whereas a devotee sees matter as, well, he doesn't really see it as matter. He sees everything as paraphernalia for engaging in Krishna's service. So how can one's realization of Krishna increase? There are some very basic points which are worth going through from time to time, just to remind us of the importance of these points. We'll find here in Srimad, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is apparent repetition of various points, and Prabhupada notes that Krishna seems to repeat himself, but Prabhupada says that repetition is necessary for complete understanding. So we'll find in the Srimad Bhagavatam also, it may appear to be repetitive. Srila Prabhupada also, he often gave these same instructions again and again and again. If we see Srila Prabhupada's letters, so many times he wrote, chant 16 rounds minimum, follow the regulated principles, follow the basic temple program, and all the devotees will advance in this way. So, some things we may have heard many times, but still there's no harm to hear them again, because it is our tendency, especially in Kali Yuga, to forget even good things that we're told. We forget, even things that are beneficial for us. And it's good also to repeat and hear, because our tendency is to take everything very lightly. and to think that somehow we don't have to follow the process of bhakti yoga and anyway we'll get the result. But it doesn't work like that. So there are some very basic points which, if followed, will help us to advance in Krishna consciousness. Often devotees come to me and ask me for some special instruction. But I tell them, you already got plenty of special instruction. Just the instruction to chant Hare Krishna, that's the most special instruction you could ever get. But we have to work on it. You have to work on chanting carefully. So what basic things do we have to do? We have to chant Hare Krishna. It's pretty basic. We only think it's very basic. What's the most basic thing in the Hare Krishna movement? To chant Hare Krishna. But that also, we have to see how we're really chanting and trying to hear and imbibing the mood of chanting, which means that we're in a mood of service. So we all have to improve our chanting. We can chant more than 16 rounds. It's not limited to 16 rounds. We can chant more also. We have extra time? We can chant more. Of course, there comes another question of, well, I'm chanting more than 16 rounds, but I don't have time to read. Or something like this. So balance is also required. That all activities are required. Hearing, chanting, serving, associating with devotees, deity worship. There are so many activities to perform in devotional service. So, we should do that in a balanced way. There should be sufficient hearing, reading, chanting. Everything is required. Yukta ahara viharasya, yukta cheshtasya, karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. Lord Krishna says here in this Bhagavad Gita that one who is regulated in his activities of sleeping, eating, recreation, work, all these different things, then such a person can execute one can actually be a yogi. So we're talking about being bhakti yogis. So all the things we're required to do, hearing, chanting. Very important is sadhu sangha. That's always emphasized. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in describing the 5 items which are most important for advancing in devotional service. The first, he said, was satsanga, sadhu sangha. It means the same thing. So it's from, of course, we can sit at home, not for those who live in the ashram. They don't have a home as such, so, or their home is the ashram. So the whole point of living in the ashram is so that to facilitate devotional service, so that we get sadhu sangha. Those who are living in the cruel, nasty, materialistic civilization of the modern world, for them in particular, it is necessary that they seek out satsanga, because they are surrounded on all sides by people who in their ordinary dealings may seem quite nice, but who are nevertheless called asat sangha if they are not devotees of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was asked about the proper behavior for devotees, he replied, asat sangha tyag e vaishnavacha, stri sangi ek asadhu, Krishna bhakta. He said that the sign of a serious devotee, or a Vaishnava, just the word Vaishnava is used, is that he gives up the association of asat, people who are not properly situated. So, satsanga, the opposite is asatsanga. So, who is that asatsanga? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied, one who is attached to women, one who associates with women, and the other is a non-devotee of Krishna. So, we may say, well, almost everyone in the world associates with women. What about the women themselves? Can't they be devotees? Yes, of course they can be devotees. But by the term Stri Sangi is meant someone who is intent on enjoying this material world. And in this material world, the highest happiness or the anchor that keeps us from advancing is attachment to sensual enjoyment, of which sexual enjoyment is the epitome. So someone who is simply interested in having to enjoy this material world, we should not associate with such people. And we should not associate with non-devotees. People who have made it their goal of life not to be Krishna conscious. That may sound extreme. That why would there may be people who are just indifferent to Krishna consciousness, but Prahlad Maharaj in Bhagavatam describes that there are people who are solidly determined not to be Krishna conscious under any circumstances. Matena Krishna Paratasvato Vamito Bhibhadyeta Griha Vratanam Adanta Gobhir Vishatang Tamisram Punaf Punas Charvita Charvananam. Prahlad Maharaj describes people who have practically made a vow that I shall never be Krishna conscious under any circumstances. Whatever may happen, I may go to hell 1,000,000 times, but I'm not going to chant Hare Krishna. Neither anyone can convince me, nor if I consider it philosophically, am I going to take up Krishna consciousness. There was a book someone showed me, this many years ago, of something like Teach Yourself Philosophy, something like that, as if it was such an easy subject. But actually the book, it was like a humorous book. It's humorous come serious. The purpose of the book was to be able to pretend that you know philosophy among people and then pass yourself as a very intellectual person. So it gave you like 2 or 3 lines on every philosopher so you could quote. Well, Kant said this, and then Adam Smith said that. But in the preface to the book, it said, by philosophy, I don't mean the kind of thing that those Hare Krishnas speak when they grab you. Something like that. Because that's real philosophy. And the other kind of philosophy is just some kind of blurb that people say to impress others. They're not serious about knowing the truth. So, there may be people who even discuss philosophy, but they're not interested in Krishna. They're quite serious to avoid Krishna. Even there are philosophy books which are presented in a kind of humorous way. Does the Center Hold is a book by a professor of philosophy somewhere in California. So he's done an overview of Western philosophy with cartoons to show the points and trying to make a boring subject interesting. But there's no Krishna. What is the actual purpose of life? The most important question is absolutely missing. So, Atato Brahma Jignasa, that important point is missing. So anyway, there are people they may be nice, polite, friendly, or they may be grumpy, or distant, the kind of person who you live next door to, but they make the point of deliberately avoiding seeing you when they walk past you every day. You don't get that so much in India, but in the West, there are people who they'll just avert their eyes from you so they don't see you. So whatever, if they're not Krishna conscious, then their association should be avoided. Of course, if one is living in a community or society of non-devotees, one cannot avoid interacting with them, but one should not be very thick and close with them. And one should seek the association of devotees. So therefore, the centers of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness are set up. Srila Prabhupada wrote in one purport that the center of these centers are made so that people can avail of the association of pure devotees, which means that those who are in the temples, they should be pure devotees. Pure devotees in the sense that their life is clearly focused on the purpose of being a pure devotee, of Mandana Bhava Mad Bhakto. It is very clearly focused on that, so that when you meet them, they don't talk about what the latest political news is, or even if they do so from the perspective of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. But by associating with them, with such devotees, one should be immediately enlivened in Krishna consciousness. That should be coming to the temple should be an uplifting experience, not simply a social experience or a religious experience, but the atmosphere created by a group of devotees coming together for the sake of selflessly serving Krishna should be so spiritual that even people who are not spiritually inclined, they cannot but be affected by it. That is the atmosphere that should be present in our temples. And those who want to be devotees but are constrained otherwise by family or social or economic considerations should at least take advantage as much as possible of the temple, just like you're all coming here. Many of you are coming here on Sunday morning. You don't come every morning, but if you could, that would be nice. Maybe some of you could move closer to the temple so that you could come regularly and do service. There are plans for that, I know. Everything's in the beginning stages here at the present time. So the temple is meant to give people an opportunity to serve Krishna. Not that Krishna cannot be served elsewhere, but there are multiple opportunities for service in the temple, and to afford them the opportunity to have satsanga, the kind of association that by associating with devotees one becomes uplifted and enlivened. Whereas if we associate with materialistic people, the tendency will be to drag our consciousness down, because sangat sanjayate kamaha. Our desires develop according to the kind of association that we get. So sadhu sangha is essential. Nowadays, with the printing press, of course, that's not very new. It's been around in human society for coming on 500 years now. We can read books. We can get sadhu sangha in that way. And with the internet, you can have your whole morning program, temple program, in your home. But still, to be actually physically, personally present, it's still different to having the morning program streamed into your or onto your computer screen. I'm saying this as this lecture is being seen remotely via the internet by some. Anyway, you could say it's the best use of a bad bargain. We didn't work out how to do that Star Trek thing of zapping people and then they reappear at some other point in the universe. What's that called? Any Star Trek fans here? No. Don't have any JD followers or something? Yeah, one result of it, anyway, that's another subject altogether. There are actually people who learn the language and believe, they call their religion JD. And fortunately for most of you, I don't even know much about it myself. I never heard of it till I met John, and then he used the word JD. I didn't know what it was, and he was surprised. So I looked it up on the internet. Where else? And found out this. Anyway, let's not talk about that. So, Satsanga. Ramanujacharya, whose disappearance day is, I believe, the day after tomorrow on the Gauriya calendar, although somehow it's different on the Ramanuja calendar. But he said, if you're so useless, I don't think he used those terms, I'm paraphrasing, if you can't do anything, you can't chant, you can't follow anything, you can't even, you're so stupid, you can't formulate any philosophy, any such thing, just go and sit down next to the devotees, that's all. Just be with them. Just somehow be in the association of devotees. Just do that. Become a cat or a dog or something and just sit with the devotees, just like we saw in Hebri, that we'd sit down and the cow and the little calf would come and sit with us. The dog would sit, and they like to get the association of actually Bhakti Raghav Maharaj. So Sadhu Sangha, Nama Kirtan, Nama Kirtan, yes. Hare Nama eva kevalam, kalo nastreva gati aranyata. There are many things to do in Krishna consciousness. Most basic of all of them is chanting the holy names. Chanting is in two divisions. Kirtan is sometimes divided into kirtan and japa. Japa is one form of kirtan. The kirtan, with devotees, singing, chanting, is very important. I mean, how much can we stress it? It's not possible to overstress it. So we should join in the kirtan. Of course, in South India, the Vaishnava and even the non-Vaishnava traditions here have always emphasized on archan and puja, or puja, I think I say in Tamil, something like that. Gets pronounced a little differently. Anyway, it's the same idea. So the idea is that one should be in archan, one should be very grave and respectful of the idols who represent the all-pervading oneness of which I am also the same, which is the general misunderstanding in South India. But kirtan, especially Gauriya style with dancing and singing loudly, making noise. Of course, they do have noise with even without the loudspeakers in the traditional culture. The mridangam makes a big noise, it's very loud. The South Indian mridangam. But that we should dance and smile, and it looks very strange, because in a temple you're supposed to be very grave. Nevertheless, those who are accustomed to this extreme gravity within the temple, they should take part in kirtan. Because this is more than, of course, the archan, we're not saying there's anything wrong with that, that's very good. We should be respectful before God. But kirtan is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy, by which we go beyond or even higher than simply respecting God and joyfully celebrating His love for us. Bhakti is full of rasa, juicy, full of love. Bhakti rasa. So that is expressed in kirtan rasa. So we should participate in kirtan. How much? Kirtaniya sada hari, always. There are many activities to perform in bhakti, but kirtan is essential. So we should do kirtan as much as possible. Now you may think, well, I only come to the temple once a week. So do it at home, or wherever you may be. This Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he recommended this. What is this? Kirtan karahe shabe, hate tali diya. He recommended that everyone should perform kirtan in the, I can't remember exactly the Bengali, but the first line, it says that in the evenings, means now day and night doesn't make much difference because of electricity. But in Tamil Nadu, people used to think it's strange we don't have electricity here, but now everywhere they don't have electricity. So, what happens when it's dark? Chant Hare Krishna. You can, if you don't have instruments, or if you're like many of our devotees, you can't play them in time, you just clap your hands and chant with your family members. That's all. You don't have to have a big kirtan group or expert kirtaniers. You can just chant with your family members. That's all. You have a little deepam that you need nowadays. And chant Hare Krishna. That's all. That's very, very simple. But Krishna is pleased. And you will be pleased. And we cannot estimate how much spiritual advancement we make simply by chanting the holy names in kirtan. It's unimaginable. We think we have to go off and sit on top of one of those hills, one of those hills where there's no mining or no tower, or there's some peaceful hill, and sit on top of a hill and do austerities. But no need. Chant Hare Krishna wherever you may be. You'll make tremendous spiritual advancement. And japa, that's also essential. Actually, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we find always the emphasis is on kirtan. Not so much on japa, although he himself performed japa, and the acharyas who were directly following him, Sankhya Purvaka Nama Gana Natibi, they also chanted by counting, and certainly Prabhupada gave us a minimum of 16 rounds japa to do. So that should be done very carefully. Everything we do in devotional service, attentively. Manmana, think of me, applying the mind. So, chanting attentively, trying to hear, trying to chant very nicely so that Krishna will be pleased, is a very basic practice. That if we do, what will happen? Hare Krishna Maha Mantra Eto Shabhav Jai Jape Tar Krishna Upajai Bhav. Whoever chants is the very nature of the Hare Krishna mantra. That whoever chants that in japa, then within their heart, loving feelings for Krishna will develop. So we've come to Krishna consciousness for the sake of becoming pure devotees for Krishna. We're sick of this material world. It stinks. Even when it doesn't stink, even the nice smell is like the trap of the nice smell which traps the insect to come, and the flower, and some flowers have a nice smell, they attract an insect and then they eat the insect. There are some plants that do that. So even if we think this material world is nice, we should know that even the niceness in this material world is a trap to entice us to go on suffering repeated birth and death. So we want to go to Krishna, we want to be a pure devotee, we want, as Krishna says, you will come to me if you always think of me. So chanting Hare Krishna Japa, essential. We're not going to be Krishna conscious unless we chant the holy names of the Lord very seriously, every day, without fail. We have to give attention to this. In modern life, this is so much. The whole attention is given to working, making money, all these things, and the family takes our attention if we're married. But our main attention should be, the focus of our life should be, how am I going to be Krishna? How am I going to be Krishna conscious? Everything else will come and go. We already had so many families, millions of families, like in the Chitraketu story. The boy died, he was brought back to life, and he was told by Narad Muni, now speak to your father and mother. The boy said, which father and mother? I already had so many. Which one are you talking about? I'm going to chant Hare Krishna and go to Krishna. He's my real father and mother. So, not that a devotee is neglectful. I was speaking yesterday about irresponsibility is not devotion. It is a misunderstanding to think that we can just neglect our the material duties that we happen to have accrued. But it's a greater misunderstanding to think that Krishna consciousness is something we have to just squeeze in somehow or other. But rather, as Prabhupada writes here, a devotee should arrange his life in such a way. One should always act in such a way that all his daily activities are in connection with Krishna. He should arrange his life in such a way that throughout the 24 hours he cannot but think of Krishna. So that has to be clearly our focus. How to be Krishna conscious. Understanding all else is temporary and meaningless. So, chanting japa, how important is it? Well, there's no way you can measure it. It's not comparable to anything else in this world. It's not How important is chanting Hare Krishna in comparison to eating, sleeping, mating, or defending? It is not comparable. These activities which are required in this material world, at least eating and sleeping are required, unless one's fully perfect. But they're not intrinsically important, whereas chanting Hare Krishna is. Then, there are so many basic principles, which you have all heard about, I hope, many times. But it's good to repeat them many times, as I said previously. Hearing, what did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said? Sadhu Sangha, Nama Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravan, the 5 important principles. Especially he recommended hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavat Shravan. Hearing. Of course, we have Srila Prabhupada's books. We can read them. That's Srila Prabhupada speaking, recorded in written form. But we also have to hear the message explained. Srila Prabhupada wanted that there be daily in his temples classes twice a day. We sometimes play recordings of Srila Prabhupada speaking, but Srila Prabhupada wanted his own disciples and discipular followers to speak and others to hear, so that devotees, by speaking, they can consolidate and deepen what they themselves have heard and what they have read. So hearing is essential. So you're coming on Sundays at least to hear. Now by the power of modern technology you can get recordings also, which are very helpful. I think we see our devotees all over the world. If they're doing some service like washing pots or cleaning floors, you'll always see them with two mini speakers or earphones in their ears, and they're hearing lectures, presumably. Yeah, I mean, in almost all cases, lectures or kirtans. So we see that also, that non-devotees, it's part of life in the early 21st century. That a lot of the time people have earphones in their ears. What they're hearing, I don't know. But what devotees are hearing, they're hearing lectures and kirtans, so you can avail of that and absorb the message of Shastra in this way. Then, so many basic principles. No time to speak them all, even briefly. But Mathura Vas is the next, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, among the 5 principles, which means to live in Vrindavan. So, to live in Mathura, to be more precise. It's not possible for everyone to live in Vrindavan. If Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also said that Krishna consciousness should be preached all over the world, but replicas of Vrindavan can be made everywhere. You can make a replica of Vrindavan in your home. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he said, Jaidina grihe bhajana deke, grihete goloka bhai. He said that when he remembered one specific day, or that day, when I was, when he was performing his activities of devotion in his home, he had a vision that his home was transformed into Golok Vrindavan. So that kind of atmosphere we want to reproduce. And actually, in many ways, in a temple community where the devotees are seriously concentrated on serving Krishna without any personal motive, that atmosphere is more conducive for spiritual realization than getting on a train. You know, direct trains from Salem to Mathura? You can go non-stop. Definitely from Chennai. You can go non-stop. So you can get on a train and within maximum 2 days you can be in Vrindavan. But the atmosphere in a center where devotees are seriously serving Krishna may be even better than being in Vrindavan, if we, in the actual Vrindavan, as you can say, if there we get the association of people who are not so clearly focused on serving Krishna, as many, if not most of the people who are living in Vrindavan are like that. Then we won't find, most of the people in Vrindavan, we won't find that seriously focused on serving Krishna as those who have heard from Srila Prabhupada and devotees purely following him. Which goes to show that association with pure devotees is more important than living in Vrindavan, because one can be living in Vrindavan and be in hellish consciousness, whereas one can be living in hell and be in Vrindavan consciousness. The latter is a much preferable situation. And Shraddhai Shri Murtir Sevan, faithfully worshipping the deity. So there are many basic principles. One thing I often mention is that this idea that you practice Krishna consciousness and at the same time you have material enjoyment. It doesn't work at all. If we think I will go to some restaurant and eat some food, I will watch some things on TV which have nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. And this is called balance. They call this being balanced. But it's out of balance. If one wants to be Krishna conscious, then any admixture of non-Krishna conscious throws the whole thing out. Often people ask me, what is the balance? Keep the balance between material and spiritual life. The proper balance, my reply is 100% spiritual, 0 material. That is the ideal balance. Because if there's anything material, then we cannot satisfy Krishna fully. Now, of course, living in this material world, there has to be some interaction with it. But the ideal to aim at is that we always think of Krishna and never forget Him. So, Hare Krishna. There, of course, many things more could be said, but I'll finish there, unless there are any questions. Probably there may be many. Any questions, please? Did we have a Hindi translation? Yeah, okay. You can follow without translation? Yeah, okay. I'm speaking quite quickly. Can we what? Can we define a devotee? Yes, we can define a devotee. Of course, there are different levels of devotee, but the basic definition is Vishnur Asya Devata Iti Vaishnava. One who accepts Vishnu as Bhagavan, as God, he is called a Vaishnava. Pure devotee means one who is fully surrendered to Krishna. So there are levels. In between mentally accepting Vishnu as one's worshipable Lord and being fully absorbed in loving service to Vishnu, there are many gradations. Various levels. Alright, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is. Ki Jai. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.